Hi, everybody. Meredith, thank you for that. It's been really funny to watch everyone be introduced by you over the years, and now I feel like I'm on the other side of some fence. I'm like part of the club now. And again, I do want to reiterate very special thanks to Mr. Maria Rice and Amanda King for your guidance and insight throughout this process working on this project, and thank you for being here. So I'm gonna do things a little differently today. Most of the time, I just flip through a bunch of slides of my work and talk about the sort of inspiration behind things, but today I'm going to try to provide some context for how I'm thinking about the project that I'm working on now. So I'll go through things sort of semi-chronologically, and then, yeah, just, I don't know, talk about some stuff. Also, I'm so nervous, so like, just, okay. I'm going to start by reading something that a passage from a text that I come back to time and time again that I find just speaks volumes about my experience and the experience of others that I know growing up and being educated in the social spaces and institutional spaces that have conditioned us. So it's from an essay by Nico DeCumos titled All Mixed Up and Nowhere to Go, Inhabiting Mixed Consciousness on the Margins. Looking back, I feel sorry for all of us, white students and students of color, economically privileged and poor, queer and straight, transgender and non-transgender, found ourselves in an overwhelming situation with no one to help us navigate the difficult negotiations and acts of violence that occur when people from all these different communities suddenly find themselves in close quarters. U.S. society, after all, continues to be starkly segregated along class and race lines, never allowing people to have the sort of interactions necessary to undo prejudices, stereotypes, and oppressions. However, my empathy only lasts so long. I remember my own experiences and those of other people I know who attended private liberal arts colleges. There is nothing like luring low-income and first-generation college attendee students of color to an institution like Smith College and then subjecting them to white, sheltered, economically privileged people to inspire thoughts of suicide and/or homicide. Ultimately, the white and economically privileged students benefit from this experience. They learn how to be good liberals and comport themselves in ways that conceal their complicity with white supremacy. They find their lives enriched by diversity. Meanwhile, students of color and poor students suffer lifelong emotional scars and face the hard truths of why they were recruited so heavily to attend these institutions in the first place. At best, students of color and poor students learn how to pass themselves off in polite, parentheses, white society, so that they can get a job at a large corporation or a nonprofit organization, perhaps learn how to invest money in the capitalist system and other American dream type skills that are meant only to benefit the individual and leave the rich-poor gap, institutionalized racism, and US status quo intact. All right, so clearly I have some feelings about things, and we're gonna talk about it today. First, though, a little background. I am a first-generation American born to parents who emigrated from Belize in the early 1970s. And for those who are not familiar with where Belize is, it's a tiny Central American country that borders Mexico and Guatemala at the Caribbean Sea on its eastern shore. My parents moved to Los Angeles. I was born in the late 80s, early 90s, mid-80s, grew up in South Central Los Angeles, late 80s, early 90s. And South Central at that time was a place that was known for, its gang violence and economic depression. Wasn't considered the safest place to be. So that in mind, my parents, really, I remember growing up and them sort of striving for what they, called better. I guess that's the idea. Like everyone wants better for their children, right? They all want sort of a type of existence that perhaps wasn't available to them as children. But growing up at that time, I I got to see my hometown filtered through the lens of popular music and Hollywood films, most notably in Boys in the Hood, John Singleton's 1991 film, and then his 1993 sort of follow-up, Poetic Justice, and maybe most hilariously, F. Gary Gray's Friday from 1995. So here's a place that I'm growing up in, living in, just being a kid, but I get to see these spaces, or my neighborhood and its inhabitants, people who live there, sort of reflected to me in this kind of bizarre non-reality. South Central was also the flashpoint for the 1992 Los Angeles Uprising, which was in direct response to 4 white police officers' acquittal of the brutal beating of Rodney King. So this is happening in real time in my childhood. This is what I'm seeing out of the back seat of my parents' car, out of the windows as we're driving around, things on fire. And I think when trying to understand my sense of place or identity within this environment, it didn't take, of course, as a kid, I couldn't realize it then, but I, with the power of retrospect, I can sort of look back at my life and my experiences and kind of piece together how I've come to do what I'm doing now. I've pulled these images from the school that I went to in South Central, a small Catholic school of mostly black and brown kids, and this is from their website. Here's another one, just to give you a sense of where I'm coming from, the educational institutions that I spent most of my time in as a young person. This is a graduation photo, also pulled from the website. And then this one is my graduation photo. This is your boy right here. Also, I had a very severe overbite, so shout out Dr. Berger, my orthodontist, when I was 13, who hooked me up with this. But so from there, my first real crisis point was then going to high school, and I pulled this from the internet of my high school, so radical shift in demographic from where I was learning from kindergarten to 8th grade, and then all of a sudden I'm thrust into an environment where hardly anyone there looks like me, and it was pretty jarring. And so I think when, I'm sure, I don't know who these guys are, I'm sure they're great, I'm not trying to blast anyone up here, but I think what I'm trying to say is I'm all for better and I'm all for striving toward a kind of liberatory, freeing spaces, but I think the problem that I have is when we're associating better and cleaner and safer with spaces that are predominantly white. I think that's a very dangerous message to send to young people about the communities that they come from and choose to live in, or maybe can't or don't have the means to move out of. And so this is what I'm grappling with as a young person, is the place that I'm from, how to envision that as a place that is inherently good because we're there and we're present. I'm gonna skip a bunch of years and go to when I arrived at art school. I'm gonna skip all the years where I was developing a queer sexual identity in those environments because that's a different lecture. And I have family in the audience, so we're gonna cool it there. So this is an artist, Chris Burden, who I thought, my view of art was quite limited prior to going to art school. I lived a very circuitous life, just kind of hopping around the Northeast prior to attending college. It wasn't something that I had any plans for until I was like, I gotta figure something else out. I can't, keep working these terrible jobs for the rest of my life. So an older artist, encouraged me to apply for art school, and I thought I was going to learn about, the landscape watercolors that were hanging in Dr. Berger's waiting room. But I got there and learned that art was way more expanded than I could have ever imagined. And one of those first lessons was learning about this piece by Chris Burden titled Shoot from 1971, where he has a friend stand about 15 feet away from him and with a .22 caliber rifle shoot him in his left arm. So as an early 20-something arriving in art school, understanding that someone pointing a gun at you and shooting you could be art was kind of a pretty radical shift in my thinking. And so I want to read a quick quote from Chris Burden in a 2015 interview with the New York Times, where he says, "I'm not sure exactly when I first came up with the idea. I mean, first of all, you saw a lot of people being shot on TV every night in Vietnam, guys my age." So here's an artist who's thinking about visual culture and how it's sort of playing out in real time in his life, and then using that to reflect the times that he's living in. I think what happens with this piece is that it becomes sensationalized. It's like, oh my God, did you hear about that guy who got shot in the arm for art? And the answer is like, well, probably yeah, but I'm more invested in why someone chooses to make a decision like this in the context of art. Another artist, Adrian Piper, who is she's a fair-skinned black woman who often is read as white. She's perceived as white. And so she, in her work, also from that time, early 70s, is kind of playing around with modes of alterity in public space. So this is from the Catalysis performance series, where she would go into public space and pretty much challenge the sort of norms of that space and of being in that space. And this one, she paints her clothes with wet paint and walks around New York City with a wet paint sign on her. Another one from the Catalysis series was she soaked her clothes in milk and eggs and vinegar and cod liver oil for about a week and then wore them out in public to sort of illustrate, otherness within public space and how bodies are formed, influenced, and read. Here's another one from that series where she put a bath towel in her mouth and just navigated the city about her day. And this is Popo, also known as William Popo, whose seminal crawl pieces are kind of a signature work of his where he'll crawl around New York City to comment on a lack of verticality, a lack of position of power, and as a black man who's like willingly giving up his verticality, he's commenting on the sort of learning that can occur in the body, the somatic knowledge that can be fostered when one goes through basically when you put yourself in someone else's shoes. It's kind of like a maybe radical empathy or something. And so I'll offer a quote from a 1996 Bomb magazine interview with Martha Wilson. This is from Popo. "I decided to literally put myself in the place of someone who might be homeless and on the street. I wanted to get inside that body. Like, what does it feel like? In certain yogas, there are body memory exercises. By treating your body in certain ways, by putting your body in a certain physiognomic situation, you can force it to experience in ways it normally wouldn't. In New York, in most cities, if you can remain vertical and moving, you deal with the world. This is urban power. But people who are forced to give up their verticality are prey to all kinds of dangers. But let us imagine a person who has a job, possesses the means to remain vertical, but chooses to momentarily give up that verticality. To undergo that threat to his or her bodily, spiritual categories, that person would learn something. I did." Okay, so now I'm gonna ditch the paper because I know how to talk about my work. It's the thing that I know most intimately. This is the first work that I made after arriving at UCLA for grad school, and I'm coming from an undergraduate art program that feels pretty supportive and feels like a big warm hug. Everyone's like, yeah, art, like, freeze frame, high five. But then I got to UCLA, which, it's in my hometown, it's Los Angeles, so there was a comfort level there, but within the program, I wasn't really ready for the type of environment that puts students and maybe even sometimes professors alike, pits them against each other for resources and accolades and opportunity. So it was something that I hadn't quite had experience with yet. And so going to UCLA, I'm thinking, again, it'll be part 2 of this like warm, supportive art group hug environment. And sometimes it wasn't. And so in response to that, I was trying to figure out my position within this new system of commercial galleries and collectors and private donors and pretty much people with a lot of money. So for the first open studio event, while people were kind of clamoring over each other to get wall space, the most prominent space to offer their art to, the very important people. I had the idea to perform an invisible gesture, or what I believed to be invisible. I was just gonna go around the space and lick every inch of the wall in a continuous line, almost like a space claiming, like, I'll show you, like, this is my shit. But I basically licked the wall, and I'm not sure if you can see it, it's kind of faint, but after about 30 seconds, my tongue was rubbed raw and then began to bleed. So if you can imagine a group exhibition space where there are sculptures and paintings and prints and photos around, and everyone's like, drinking, free wine, having cheese plates, and then there's me licking around the perimeter, leaving blood around everyone's work. It didn't go well with the administration or my peers, but I think this was in response to feeling quite literally pressed up against a wall in that environment, in a space that the messages that I was receiving were kind of like, if you don't make art this way, then there's gonna be a problem. So here I am again, having to make myself smaller at the service of other people, and I don't really play nice when that happens. I'm not trying to, I'm just trying to figure out how to do this. So the following year was an MFA Preview show, and so I have a whole year of being in this environment, trying to figure out what it is that I'm actually doing and how to respond to the pressures that I feel there. And the following year, there was a donor event, so people from the program, or who donated to the program, the people who give scholarships, again, very wealthy people, there was a private reception only for them, and then we were told that we would be able to invite our friends and family later in the evening. Again, I know now that this is customary. It's still a little weird, but at this point, I was frustrated that I couldn't invite my friends and family and people who I actually felt supported by. I had to, kind of dance for the donors of the program so that they could give more money. And this was all just things that kind of sent my mind spiraling. So for this performance, understanding quite well that I'm now on the inside, I can't be on the outside throwing rocks, saying like, this is bad, we need to change it, because I'm implicated within this system. They accepted me into the program, I'm there making art. So I stood on the inside of the building, or inside of the gallery, and held the doors shut from the inside for the duration of the private reception, which was only an hour. It was from like 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. But here are a few clips of people trying to get out to get more wine and get fresh.
Jesus Christ.
So in order to get in and out of the gallery, you had to confront my body. Here's another clip of an interaction. So again, this wasn't something that the administration was like, nice job, like, we really love the work you're making. But again, I wasn't doing anything that wasn't already in place. I was just actualizing the border that had been created by the system. I just personified it. I put my body in the position of the border, the time constraint that they had devised. That wasn't me. So in a lot of what I'm doing, I'm thinking about how to just embody the things that I feel that I'm quite sensitive to, but that might be invisible for others. So a note about this. This is my MFA thesis piece. This is how I left grad school. This is how I went off into the big, wide world of art after being a student. And again, after a couple years of just really trudging through a few things, I decided that I didn't want to give anymore. So for my last month of school leading up to my MFA thesis show, I took a 30-day vow of silence. I didn't speak to anyone for the 30 days leading up to my thesis exhibition. So for my show, I go into the empty gallery where there's no art on the wall. After 2 years of study, you're supposed to, present your research, what you've done there. So this is the empty gallery, and this is still actually pretty hard for me to watch, and I don't have it on the website. I don't put it anywhere, so it's like kind of crazy to share it in a platform like this, but it's, again, a little difficult for me, so if you need to, maybe take a break outside, do that. But after the 30 days of silence, I broke the silence, and this is a 6-minute clip of that performance.
Nothing happened. What? For who? Exactly. That would be the point, I think. No scholar.
Are you sure?
No, but perhaps anything else would be self-indulgent. I don't know.
So I had to figure out another way to do this art thing. Because if I kept doing it like that, I knew I wasn't gonna make it. So then I turned to painting. And a type of painting at that time that has now been referred to as zombie formalism, this kind of just like brainless, it's colorful, it shapes, the criticism is that there's no content in it. And the conversation while I was in school was that it was reserved for pretty much, those who make art about nothing. And the expectation is that because I live in this skin, my art, my work has to adhere to codes and precedents that have to speak on like large systemic oppressions. And I was feeling a little trapped by that. So I started to just use color and form, but even when I'm trying to reduce it to abstractions, the meanness of it all continued to seep through. This is a work, probably the first work that I made where I'm beginning to think about school as a site, as a place of joy and learning, but also trauma. This is from a very specific memory as a kid where, I don't know if you're, playing double dutch at recess or whatever, and there's only two of you, the sort of, default is you tie the two ropes, the end of it, to a fence, and there's your third person. The fence is the surrogate for a third. As, again, growing up, having only girlfriends as like a young, queer boy, when the girls started to check out boys and when they were developing, I was pretty much left to my own devices. The boys didn't want anything to do with me because I was, terrible at basketball and football and just wanted to hang out and, braid hair at recess. But so I kind of went back to that place and for this performance tied a rope to the end of, or one side of the fence and jumped until my legs gave out pretty much, until my knees locked up, muscles cramped, and I just collapsed in the gallery. So I'm thinking about these gestures to the point of exhaustion, not for the sake of being tired or depleted, but for the moment after you recover and you get back up. That's toward the end of the second hour, beginning of third. So you can imagine a kind of rhythmic, clicking on this wooden floor with this like beaded jump rope. The sound kind of became sinister. But so this suite of paintings, again, going back to painting, it's always the return to painting for me is a space of calm and quiet, recharge. This is at the time of very highly publicized murders of Black people by police. Every time I opened my phone, turned on the computer, there was something else. And I remember at this time feeling like I couldn't really move forward. I locked myself in my apartment, basically, didn't leave it for 2 weeks, and the only space that I had, the only emotional, mental space that I had was painting. Bright colors, fluffy shapes, abstraction, because it's all that I had the energy for. I was afraid to leave my apartment because I thought that if I left, it was going to be me. I was going to be the next one. And when I say this out loud now, so many years after the fact, it sounds kind of like, maybe irrational, I don't know, but at that time it felt, like the threats to my body still are quite lethal. And this is something that I carry in me wherever I go. So on the surface, bright abstract shapes, paintings, but beneath the surface, I'm really just trying to survive. At this point, I'm starting to develop the practice to include sculpture because I really am in self-preservation mode at this point. By the end of 2015, summer of 2015, I'm realizing that my body is, we're all pretty finite. Our time here is limited, but I feel as though some of us may have an even more limited time under certain circumstances. So I went into self-preservation mode and decided that the work that I was going to make, I'd hopefully offer up spaces for other bodies so that I'm not putting myself, my mental and physical self on the line each time. So this performance, or installation actually, titled Lemonade, was my first public work. You'd go up to the lemonade stand, there'd be a performer there at certain times of the day to give free lemonade, and once you got your lemonade, you got a card that read this on one side. My position is that you cannot work towards peace being peaceful. If the peace is to be one where everybody's quiet and doesn't open up, share what's unspeakable, offer unsolicited criticism, defend others' rights to speak, and encourage discourse, that peace is worth nothing. It reminds me of the kind of peace that was secured in my old country under the communist regime. That is the death of democracy. That might have consequences as bad as war, bloody war and conflict. So, to prevent the world from bloody conflict, we must sustain a certain kind of adversarial life in which we are struggling with our problems in public. And that's from Christophe Woritzko, who teaches here at the Graduate School of Design. And so this is on one side of the card. You get your lemonade. This is on one side, and then this is on the other. So as you get your card and your lemonade, you're ushered by the performer to the platform here off to the side to struggle in public. This work is like, I'm realizing now I overshot with my images, so I'm just gonna channel surf a little, bear with me. But this work this marks a really, really big point in my practice because where the lemonade piece was a moment of sculpture, this is kind of I'm starting to feel the wheels turn, no pun intended, on a practice that involves just a pure love. I'm no longer feeling the pressure of needing to say something large in the production process or in the process of developing new work. I'm not making the grand comments then. I'm just coming from a more pure place in the things that entertain me, the things that I know will keep me interested for months at a time. So I started making work about roller coasters because for a very long time since childhood, they just brought me so much joy. And so thinking about fun and joy and what keeps you alive and interested, for me, that's always been amusement parks and roller coasters. So while I was at the Studio Museum in Harlem, I had about 8 to 11 months to just focus on whatever it was that I wanted to focus on. So I had time and space, and for the first time, resources to be really ambitious. So I created a 40-foot long sculpture with neon flex, LED neon flex. It's wood and neon, and this is at the time where I'm trying to figure out how to not just be the performance guy. You know, I want to develop the practice and not be sort of one note. But as I was walking to my studio one day while building this work, I walked past 3 men on a stoop, and I hear one of them say, "Look, here comes another one." And I look up just like, what? And then one of his friends points his fingers in like gun formation and goes, "Pop, pop, pop, put them all down." And this was days after Pulse, nightclub shooting. So once again, my body holds the echo or remnant of something that if I'm not carrying it in one way, it's another way. And I think at that moment, it took every fiber in my body to not collapse on the sidewalk there and just sob, but also not to unleash via my fist on these 3 men. And so the performance element of this, I was like, all right, I know what I need to do. This isn't going to be just another sculpture. I'm going to lie on this platform for the entire 3.5 months that this show is open to the public. So that was 4 days a week, up to 9 hours a day, horizontal, without breaks for bathrooms, without food, without getting up until the very end of the day. And so here I'm thinking about, much like Popo in the beginning, how to reframe how the motionless horizontal black body reads. Because every time I saw it, it was connected to death, and that was not something that I could continue carrying around with me. So in order for me to see a lifeless, or not lifeless, but a motionless horizontal black body, I had to formulate a set of experiences for myself with the understanding that I got up at the end of each day. The process is very, it's rooted in life, it's rooted in deep breathing, but in a way it's an attempt to sort of queer that image. I'm gonna skip through these in the service of time, but the show directly after that was a meditation on elevation, pretty much. So where a monumental offering of potential energy, the roller coaster piece where I'm horizontal and low to the ground, this is the flip side of that where I'm thinking about let's get lifted. This is titled Sunrise Over Mount Thompson, which is my maternal family's name. Shout out Auntie Sharon in the audience. This serves sort of as the anchor piece to that exhibition. This sculpture titled Pillar, I'm thinking here about art historical references, classical marble sculpture, you know, the ancient, what you learn in Art History 101 about the most important civilizations on the planet, right, usually come from one small region of the globe. So I'm thinking about these things and my relationship to these histories and where I fit in classical canons. So the roller coaster as form comes back, but this time it's 2.5 stories tall, longer than 40 feet. At this, I think this one was maybe almost, well, I was in Venice, so it was like, you know, metric system. I don't know. It's a whole thing out there. But so I'm thinking again about just like how to be visible, how to be seen, and this is, you know, basically it's the pedestal, right? It's a pedestal filtered through me and my histories. And so this performance was about 6 hours over 3 days, totaling to 18 total hours, where I'm climbing and walking on this 2.5-story tall structure. So yeah, here I'm opening up to other performers. Again, just I can't continue to do this myself, so I'm hiring friends and other artists to sort of enact these these structures. And I just threw this in there just to give you a sense of its tallest point. That's, no straps, no tethers. It's kind of, it was really dangerous, but again, the threat, I think, or the perceived threat is part of what I'm trying to work through. This is the coaster reinstalled, the Studio Museum coaster reinstalled in Los Angeles that was open to performers, LA area performers. This is a Black queer femme band, FUPU, Fuck You Pay Us, and their whole ethos is, Black queer femmes to the front, we're here for reparations. So it's this like heavy punk offering that every time I've been to one of their shows, it's quite an experience. I don't know if you ever have a chance to go to a FUPU show. It's like spiritual almost, unreal. So I'm going to end the last few minutes talking about the project that I'm most recently coming off of, which is the Made in LA show at the Hammer, where I revisited every school that I've attended in Los Angeles, which Meredith mentioned in her introduction. And I collaborated with photographer Texas Isaiah, who is a wonderful image maker, dear friend, and who spent the larger part of 2018 by my side developing this work with me. He followed me around these schools, running with me with camera equipment, and documented these runs. And these are, I'm doing these like 6-mile runs in 90-degree weather. It's the first time in a lot of these cases where I'm going back to these schools, going back to these sites, and really dealing with my old ghosts. And I know now when I drive past these schools, I have new memories. So the action did what I needed it to. I have like I saw a bumper sticker for one of my high schools, and usually when I'd see the bumper sticker on cars, I'd be like, ugh. But then I saw it a few months ago when I was in LA back home, and I smiled. So this is like this practice is restorative in a way, and so I'm like understanding that I can put my body in certain situations that might be grueling at first, but hopefully the idea is that it'll be transformative or healing even. This was one of my favorites from that series because it reminds me of one of my favorite sculptures, the Ecstasy of St. Teresa, the marble, she's like being pierced in the heart. So this is the resulting installation, the podium. And so here I'm thinking of several references as well. The torch in the foreground of this photo here is, sure, it can be read as like Olympic torch, like triumphant victory, but I'm developing this work at the time of, Charlottesville. So these are the references that I have in my mind. The 10-foot wooden wall is titled Hurdle. But I'm thinking about these in our contemporary moment. The first, second place, third place, first, second, third place podium. Thinking of 1968 Summer Olympics in Mexico City. But also, Wendy Davis, the senator from Texas who performed a 13-hour filibuster standing without bathroom breaks in an effort to block further restrictions on women's abortion rights, reproductive rights. So I'm having all of these things kind of like swim in my head about different bodies and how we're trying to just find a space where we can be. So this performance, which was kind of like the final boss in the video game, it's UCLA was the grad school. It's the only school that I didn't run around. It was the school that I stood in for 3 months, 9 hours a day, 6 days a week, without breaks. So it became this kind of a monastic experience as well. So I was thinking of, there's these pillar saints. I think the first recorded Saint Simeon Stylites, who stood on a pillar for the last 37 years of his life. And so these references, they're like, I'm just trying to find my place within a lineage of people who are using their bodies, whether it's in an art context or religion or sports. We use our bodies in ways to understand the larger human condition, and this is just, my crack at that. So the neon piece behind me was the sort of mantra, I guess, that I used to get me through the summer, thinking about a future space, because if not the ones that I had attended, if not those schools that I had spent so many years in, then where? Which now I'm developing a work here at Radcliffe, and I'm not gonna show any images from that because it's still too soon, the works are in progress, but I'm thinking about these future institutions, and if there were places that were designed from the beginning in a more inclusive spirit, rather than kind of rectifying past ills, saying like, oh, we're sorry about the past, 300 years, but like you can come now, it's fine. Like we did it wrong at first, but now we're good. I'm considering what if we had spaces that were designed now that from the very, very beginning are built upon an ethos of like a radical inclusion, and what could that look like? What would the lessons be? What would the mission statement be? And so as I'm like turning the wheels on this, I came up with the title of, Imagine School, University of St. Tamir, and this is where I'm kind of leaning and hoping to, create works that kind of speak to this, but also open up spaces for actual, the spaces of my design. I'm thinking about like how to create programs for youth that may benefit from these, the same youth that kind of have the weights in their bodies. And again, super special thank you to Mr. Maria Reyes, Amanda King, who have been working with me, providing insight for this project. I'm gonna end, I don't know if you can see this actually, I'll read it and then I'll end with a clip. It says, "Where on earth, in which soils, and under what conditions will we bloom brilliantly and violently?" So lastly, this clip, again, is much like what I opened up with, the text I opened up with. I find myself coming back to this and I hear it echoing in my head as I'm like going into this new project.
That how you design those programs. In all of the programs that I attended, all of the education that I had, college, public, and otherwise, nobody ever told me that I was an African woman. Nobody ever told me what the history of African people were. Nobody ever told me that America is business, and without business you will have nothing and be nothing. And nobody ever told me how to organize business so that I would be able to develop institutions in my own community. So now the sincerity of all of the programs and all of the education has to be questioned, indicted, and convicted, because the bottom line is that America is not and has never tried to produce African adults who are functional, self-sufficient, who understand their politics, their economics, and their relationship to the world politics and the world economics.
Thank you.